service. And then did a, what did I call it? Did I do it to CD to do? And let's generate a tasks model real quick. We're just going to go through some stuff. I usually don't make extensive use of the kind of scaffolding generator code. In fact, I write everything myself except for migrations. And we're purposely not scaffolding a new app because it gives all this kind of view crud, and I feel like it'd be easier just to build our own rather than mess with what's generated. So you can do tasks, and let's do name. Everyone remember the syntax? Is that the right way? Cool. Let's just do that. Let's keep it. One more attribute. Name. How about description? Cool. Great. I think I need to create the database. I'm going to use SQLite, so it should all kind of be ready to go. And then migrate to create the database table to back the model. And we should be all good. Anyone want me to pause real quick if you're following along? Or I usually don't follow myself. Everybody likes it. I mean, the people find it very valuable, so I want to accommodate. Just being honest. When I attend classes, so cool. So now we have a model. If we look in our project directory here, wow, that's not very useful. We can kind of see what we've got. I use RubyMine if this is new to some of you people, some of y'all, and I definitely don't encourage. If you're learning, don't worry about IDEs. I simply use it because I like the text editor, and I'm kind of too lazy to set up Sublime. So let's see. You can see what we've got here so far. We have a tasks model, which is kind of cool. There's really not much in it, but we don't really need much. We have a views directory we already got with the layouts, and here we have application HTML to ERB, which I talked about. And this is kind of doing the basic setup stuff to your page, right? And typically you might throw in, this is where you do your nav here, right? Et cetera, et cetera. Then if you wanted to make a custom template, like I discussed, you'd create a new file in here and call it like tasks or tasks.html to ERB. And that would apply whatever you put in that file to anything rendered within the task controller. Maybe we'll do that in a minute. So let's actually have some. Let's make a p nav. And let's just do this for fun. And if we do Rails S, we can see if we have a server set up and check for a quick sanity check by going to localhost 3000. And here is the file we all know and love. So like before you were supposed to like remove this file or something like that, and now I think you just override it. But it probably tells you where it is. You can look it up. So you can also get some kind of cool information here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a controller action. We're just going to set our root to that action. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make a controller. You see we have an application controller. I think I'm just going to do it by hand here. So task controller.rb. What was that, Ken? Oops. Get rid of all this stuff. Sorry here. Sorry about that. And that's the other thing. There we go. Task controller. So class. like most things in Rails, your controllers are actually plain old Ruby objects that simply descend from other plain old Ruby objects with a lot of stuff thrown in for free. But there's nothing really magic about it. There's no reason you can't write these things yourself. And I encourage you to do that. It helps get an understanding of what's going on, and also helps, at least for me, helps me feel that Rails is a little bit more malleable, and I can change things up, and things like that. So we just need let's do something pretty simple here. Let's just start with an index, right? This is a to-do app, so what's the most basic thing we want to do? We want to show all the crap we got to get done. So that is pretty much all we need to do there. We're not going to look into the database or anything. And then we're going to set up a root path. Man, oh man, do they fill this with a lot of stuff. Root. Okay. I can't remember the syntax here exactly. There, okay, cool. Root. The syntax, there's a bunch of different syntax I think you can use, but in the routes file in general, this is. Oh, thank you. Damn it. Yeah, I was like, all the damn comments. Welcome index, thank you. Okay, cool, yeah. I think you can do it otherwise too. But what it is the name of the controller, then followed by the pound sign and the name of the action inside the controller. Right? And so you can do, this is kind of a common thing in the routes. So if we do this here, aha, cool. So it says the template's missing, which is confusing because it's actually saying the view is missing. But
you should actually probably restart your router, your server, because you had a route.
Oh, you're probably right. Let's see. So it knows we're looking for index, and so we set the home path correctly. What it's saying here is it's saying it can't find a view to render here. It doesn't know what to do. So let's tell it what to do. So I think you guys probably all know that we're going to create a tasks folder in the views, right? Nope. Okay. Some of this. So in order to specify the view, we're going to use the Rails convention over configuration kind of setup, right? So instead of telling Ruby or Rails all the time what views to render, we're going to rely on some simple conventions. So the overall problem, right, is we have this app now, and we've successfully told it that we want this tasks index thing to be our homepage, but the application is telling us, I don't know what view to render, right? I don't know what to look at to build the actual HTML to show the person. And you can see how there's a couple of ways we could solve the problem. One is we could just explicitly tell it, hey, this file over here. But with Rails, we like to not do that, and we like to rely on the application being able to kind of predict where such a file might be. And that's what we mean by convention over configuration. So if you kind of do things the same way, a lot of this fancy Rails magic happens. That'll stop happening if you start doing weird things, and then you have to start being more explicit. So the major convention when it comes to views is that you'll have a folder inside your views directory that will match a controller, right? And Rails is going to figure out that any action I'm rendering in the tasks controller, I'm going to look inside the tasks folder in the views directory to look for that. Right? So that's going to be the first place. And then once it gets in there, it's going to look for a file with the same name of the action. So .html. Cool? And let's just do that. So
Does it need to be ERP?
no. You know what? See what happens. Yeah, so it's a good question. We'll get into that in a minute, but I think anything will work. What do you guys think? Is this going to work? Probably.
It will as long as
Yeah, cool. That's great. So it lives, right? Does that make sense? Pretty cool, right? So that's basically vanilla Rails views in a nutshell. But I think we can kind of delve a little bit deeper. Anyone have any questions so far? And then we'll get to the ERB business, the preprocessor. Cool. So the first thing is we're probably going to put an HTML extension on this file here. By convention, documents on the World Wide Web are served with HTML. Does anyone know what? I mean, I guess a JSON would be maybe a common format. Does anyone know another a non-HTML format that we might render in a view?
XML?
Yeah, XML, totally. Yeah, especially if it's an API. Maybe, yeah. It's the same kind of logic applies. YAML. What about, there's another one, too. This is a weird case. JavaScript. So if you're doing AJAX calls in Rails, a lot of times, if you do, if you're sending a little JavaScript payload, kind of in the background, Rails will listen for it, it'll catch it, it'll do stuff, and it's going to send some stuff back, right? What's it going to send back? A lot of times it'll send back JSON or some sort of structured data, but you can actually send back JavaScript, which the browser will then render immediately, which is cool. So let's say, you can do things like turn off swirly buttons when the request comes, right? Flip a red thing to green to let it know, pop up a modal with an error message or something like that. So, so you can do all kinds of fun stuff. And a little more fun. Cool, we have an HTML document now. Did you put nav and footer in the file?
Nope.
Yep. That's probably why. Well, and there's one more kind of cool thing we can do in terms of this file business, and we can give it the extension ERB. Who's familiar with ERB? No, cool. Anthony, you probably are, right? Yeah, cool.
It's a text, right?
I'm sorry?
It's a regular text.
Oh, like latex, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't really know latex very well, so I'm not even going to answer that. It's a templating language for Ruby. So I think in some ways, yeah, but in some ways, maybe not. I don't really know. But what it is, functionally, is how we mix Ruby into the HTML documents, right? So if you guys have coded with PHP, it's kind of like how PHP works. You just kind of put it into the HTML, and it's all kind of concatenated into one big blob. So ERB is the common thing we use to insert Ruby. Also, people use another thing called HAML. You guys might have seen that. Which do you have a preference? Yobi?
ERB.
Oh, ERB. Okay, yeah. So I was looking. So there's a new thing called Slim, by the way. Yeah. So they're a great and important wars fought over the proper choice of the templating language. HAML is a shorter, more concise language. Basically, you omits closing tags and a bunch of extra stuff. So if you're one of those people that really, really hates typing, you might look into it. I use ERB, just kind of it's standard, and it's like one less thing I kind of need to remember. So cool. Let's mix in a little bit of ERB here, and let's go back to the task controller and send a variable along. So most people know this kind of pattern where we have an instance variable defined in a controller method, right? And this is available to the view, right? So a lot of times you'll do something like Let's do that. And let's just go into the console real quick. And we're going to make a couple of it wasn't very happy with that. That's why models are always singular in Rails, and I mess up and go away. And task controller, that's actually pluralized. This is where the IDE is kind of gets in your way because it wants to do all this smart kind of name refactor in business. That's kind of okay. And then in the model, task, cool. So. Great. Okay, what's the name for a task? Laundry. C.description equals smelly. Okay. Great. What's another one? And what's the task name?
Dishes.
Dishes. And we'll do shopping. It's interesting you list that as a task. Some people, yeah, some people describe it as a relax. I sort of agree with it. I'm a horrible speller. Is that close? Well, we got two of them in there. That's good enough. So now, because I seeded the database, if we go to the task controller, this is basically going to this is going to do this, as you guys probably know, and it's going to assign the active record collection of all the tasks to a tasks instance variable, which is going to be passed on available to the view. So I'm going to check the whiteboard here. Cool. Everyone cool on that? That's a very kind of common kind of Rails thing. The point is any instance variable here will get passed to the view, and you can assign all kinds of things. It doesn't have to be. Typically, you'll assign it to the output of some sort of database call, right? But it doesn't have to be. You could assign it. You could be like at task equals all. I don't know why you do that, but it's pretty arbitrary. And all those are going to be available. There's a convention that you only assign 2 of these variables per action, which I find actually challenging to do in practice a lot of times. I don't know what the functional limit is, but a lot of times, if you'll have a couple of other kind of things you want to make available to the view. So let's make this dynamic. Let's add some content. I think the first thing, let's tell the user how many tasks we have. How's that sound? Cool. So to do that, we need some ERB. Make another P here. There are X new or tasks. And if we refresh, that is curious. Anyone have any idea why I got that? Should we restart the server?
Did you save it?
Hmm?
Save it.
Yeah, RubyMine saves it automatically. Good call. Yeah. Index to HTML.erb. Super weird.
So if you go back to the error,
I think I found it. All right, Anthony, hold on.
No,
Hopefully I'll.
yeah, it's looking for some of the tasks.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's that IDE renaming. Cool. So we need to insert some ERB into here to make this useful. So the way you do it, there are two types of ERB tags, right? ERB is a concept of an opening and a closing tag, and then in the middle of that you put Ruby, which is cool. And there's two types of tags. One comes with this equal sign, and that's going to take whatever the output of whatever Ruby you put into this, and it's going to insert that output into the HTML kind of inline in the document. Right. The other one, it doesn't have an equal sign, and this is going to perform some sort of logical operation and take action based on the outcome. So typically, if you're using like an if-then statement or some sort of logical control structure, you're going to use this tag. And if you're doing what we're doing now, you're just basically inserting some sort of calculation or variable into your document, you're going to use the equal sign. Probably use the equal sign 10 to 20 times as often as you use the actual like application. Shouldn't be doing a whole lot of logic in your views. Hopefully that's not a revolutionary statement. So we can do that. And that is just going to count the number of things. That's cool, right? Everyone with me so far? Cool. So let's make it a little bit better, and let's tell the user about tasks. So we're going to make a table, and you notice ERB works a lot like Ruby, really. This is a standard Ruby loop. And I'm just going to set it up inside these tags. You notice I have to close both of the, I have to close the end in this thing too. I'm not using the equal sign down here, but I am up here. This is actually sort of confusing. It used to be that with some of these tags, like looping tags, you would do it like this, which to me makes more sense intuitively because you're not actually putting the output of the control. But I'm pretty sure that the standard now is to put the equal sign on this line. I know that's true for the form 4 helper, which is common. Anthony, do you use that? Okay, cool. So we're just going to actually. So for each task, what we want to do is we want to put it on a row, right? So let's do a quick th name and description, right? And then we're going to make some more rows. Whoops. And inside the TD, we're going to do task.name, and then we're going to do tr td task.desk. Cool. All this makes sense?
Oh no, I'm just looking at it. It's kind of like HTML.
It is kind of like it actually is. In some sense, it is HTML. It's going to be pre-processed by putting that ERB at the end of the file name. We're actually telling the Rails asset populating preprocessor to pre-process the file with ERB. And there's probably a lot of different preprocessors you could use.
Makes sense.
So this should loop through each task and create a table row with the information in it. And of course, it's not at task.name because I'm inside this loop and I'm referring to each task as I go through the loop. This is not a Rail. This is just kind of standard old Ruby. Any questions on this?
So here you're mixing Ruby and HTML?
Yes, exactly, yeah.
What
And
is that TR sample?
that's a table row. It's an HTML element. And then it's TD is table data. See up here is the table header row. Did I get it right? I'm wrong.
I
About
was
that.
gonna say we were taught to, like, if you put that equal.
Yeah, exactly.
Put the stuff.
Splat, which is weird because for Form 4 you have to put the equal sign.
Huh.
It's super weird. Yeah, I'm pretty positive with that. Yeah. So what happened is this is very helpful for debugging. This of course might be super helpful.
That's a pretty cool mouse, man.
But thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. That's pretty cool.
So it's also weird that I've got everything here on one, or is this just a CSS? Whoops, of course. If you guys, anyone have repetitive motion problems with their hands, I highly suggest these things. Cool. We got some stuff. Cool. Let's make it a little bit more complicated. Let's just to kind of contrive some examples here, right? Status, and then, points. We're going to gamify this then. And then, cool. And, task, index, and then points. Some needless ERB there, huh? So don't do stuff like this. Right, I could just type that in. It's not really doing much, but it'll work, I think. Okay, cool. Index 1, sure. A lot of points. Cool. Okay, so I just wanted to complexify the thing for a little bit because I wanted to introduce the question of how do you deal with complicated views. Right, because you can imagine so far now, you know, the jump from here to something kind of complex is actually pretty small, right? You just kind of keep doing this, right? You have a model, it's got more and more fields, you can add more tables, and then, you know, let's say, you know, you want to, the tasks are, you know, we need to make them part of projects, and so we need some information about the project over here. Pretty soon, this cool thing is going to turn into something that actually people might use. But as that happens, there's going to be more and more stuff in here, and it's going to be really kind of complicated. You're going to look at this file in 6 months and be like, oh my goodness, what is going on? Because there's 500 lines of HTML mixed up with ERB, and there's all this like if-then logic in there, so you know that's really hard to change. How do we kind of manage this and deal with this code in a productive way? Is a hard question. But one of the kind of simple things you can do is break out the code into its own different files or into partials. And this is a pretty standard practice in Rails these days. Y'all know what I mean when I mean partials? Kind of intuitively makes sense, right? So let's partialize this up. Alex, You know about partials? You want to tell what do we? Let's break out this table thing into its own partial.
Right.
How's that sound?
Yeah. So you want to make a new view file
Cool.
um,
In here, right?
in your tasks, yeah. And it's gonna have underscore at the beginning of the file name.
Uh huh.
Call it like table.
Yeah, cool. Let's do something like that, right? And then cool. Anyone have any other conventions for how to the underscore starting the name is a standard convention in Ruby on Rails to indicate that this file is a partial. And I'm pretty sure if you let's try something. Anyone know what'll happen if I do this? I think Rails will ignore that with the underscore in it and it won't render that as a regular partial. Yeah, cool. Okay, so it's useful for the underscore character leading is useful for humans to understand what's going on. Rails is smart enough to understand that that's not actually a view. And there's also a nice little naming convention we use when we insert it into the actual content. So to do that, we use a standard ERB tag, and there's a method called render that you can use, and you pass as a argument to that the relative file path of the partial minus the underscore, right? So does anyone have any idea why there's that, like, put an underscore on the file name but then like drop it on the reference?
Sure.
Isn't that I find it kind of odd that when you're making a partial, you put an underscore at the beginning of the name, but then you need to drop it because this won't work. This will break. Sort of like is job security for Rails developers is what it is. In some sense it makes sense. It's nice to have that kind of naming convention to know these are partials by glance. But then to me it just seems sort of like useless domain knowledge. But you just remember the one thing in Rails views and partials, you put the underscore on the file system name, but you drop it when you reference it in your actual code. That being said, but other stuff, though, is sort of passed through. So let's say you had a partial that was in a different directory than the actual directory in your current view file. Like I said, this is a relative path, right? So let's say you wanted to render a partial that was in a directory in your views file called shared. You would do shared, right? These are, when you switch to the explicit path, the path becomes relative to the views folder. But when you just have the file name, it looks first in the actual current directory. Which is kind of weird if you think about that as well. Does that make sense to everybody? So this would be a common thing. Let's say you've got like a set of like login, log out buttons that you want to include on every single page, right? Well, you'd probably make some folder called shared. Actually, we can do that. Let's just do that real quick. Shared, right? And we're going to make a partial called reading. And reading is going to be here. When you drop the file name extension as well. So this should work. Yeah, cool. So see how hello is being rendered, even though I stripped it out of this file and made a reference over here. So if we wanted to change it, of course, we would change it here. Oops. Hello. Does that make sense? So you can put your partials in different places, which is really super useful when you want to reduce the repetitiveness of your view code. What really sucks is you have an application with like 18 pages and you have like this 4 buttons that are on 12 of them and you realize you need to change the buttons. Like, woe to you who has to find all of them, because you won't. All right. So you want to be somewhat aggressive about doing this. That being said, you know, the preemptive refactoring is never a good idea. Like you don't want to. What you don't want to do is sit out and build your app and be like, everything needs to be in a partial, right? And define like 15 of them before you know you need them. But you still want to be thinking after you repeat code a couple of times in your reviews, you want to start thinking about how I can factor this into a partial. And by convention, if it's a partial that's going to be shared among many controller actions, you put it in the shared folder. Or I do. You know, you could name it something else, but you tend to kind of break that out into its own directory. And then partials that pertain just to actions within that controller, you kind of leave in that in that name directory. Does that make sense? But you could do whatever you wanted, really. You know, there's no real reason you'd have to do that. You could tell Rails wherever. It just needs to be inside the views directory, and you know, you drop the underscore and drop the name extension. Make sense? Cool. You can also do this in your layout. So where is my layout? So file head. So we can do oh, that's interesting.
I think you need to give it the ERB. Give your head.
Do I need? Okay, I was wondering about that.
There's because it's processing the Ruby, and you have Ruby tags.
I do have a Ruby.
Rails tag.
I do have a Rails tag in there. You're absolutely right. But I also think I have it. I actually need to be explicit about this. This is interesting.
Yeah, I just did the same thing and it worked anyway.
Oh, really?
Which was odd to me.
Yeah, that's cool. So I actually had to. So this makes sense. So render is always looking in the directory of the current controller action, even if you have it in the application layout file. So when you're putting stuff in your templates, if you're using this, you got to remember to give it the kind of full path. So cool, and that's always a handy thing to do. Okay, cool. So let's do this task table business. Any questions on this so far? Cool. Is this a good level of content? Am I just repeating stuff that you guys know, or are we picking up new stuff? I've never had so few questions ever before. Usually I get to like 3 things and someone's like, "What's the migration?" Yeah.
Like, I feel like I have a decent sense of it, but how much is too much as far as bringing everything into its own partials? I feel like you can't touch that for a second, but like, you know, what's overkill if like every element is getting its own little partial file and stuff like that?
That'd be kind of funny, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, partial dip.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's sort of just up to, you know, it's probably the same metric you use to decide whether to refactor any of your other code, right? That's what I'd say. And I think that point is when you get friction in making a change. You know, when you get to something, because you probably don't want to just sit there on Saturday morning and be like, I'm going to refactor my stuff. It's always a bad idea, and everyone does it. Yeah, because you're going to break stuff. And so what I say is like, wait until you have the feeling like this would be a lot easier if I had done this, and then take the time. And then if you have the time, try to do it. There's
readability statement too. You know, they're kind of just a compartmentalize for readability. That's kind of where how I make my decisions.
That being said, now whenever I write a page, if I'm doing kind of this like looping through on it, so if I write an index view, I always break the looped table rows out into a partial. I just do NSP, just in a sort of convention and readability as well. Yeah, so there's actually a good plug. There's you guys know ThoughtBot? ThoughtBot is a consultancy here. They maintain Factory Girl, Paperclip, Shoulda Matchers, a lot of pretty big time Rails gems. And one of the teachers is a staff person there. They have a great book called Ruby Science, which is about basically refactoring Ruby code, and there's a lot of kind of good, just kind of like meta questions, like, you know, when to do it, when not to. So, although I think it's mostly based on actually like Ruby, not necessarily Views. Cool. So let's break this out into something something reasonable. And I'm going to contrive this example a little bit more than I probably would normally, just for fun. So let's grab this whole thing, and we're going to put this whole thing in a thing called task table. Cool. Does anyone know why this is not going to work, though? Oh, except it worked. Goddamn real. It's too smart for me. Really? It's actually working? It really should. Wow. I didn't think that would work.
I'm not sure why.
Because normally you have to do.
Oh.
That was the whole point of this. So what's going on here is it's implicitly passing the instance variable to the partial. A lot of times it won't do that, and you want to pass an explicit instance variable either through a loop or something like that. And what you do is you just specify that as an argument or as a hash afterward. So you can do all kinds of stuff like flag true, and then but I guess you don't have to do it. Normally what I do, yeah, it is. And to be honest, this is what I normally do, is this, and this works. But you don't have to. This is more verbose. So what I tend to do is I tend to assign the variables to not instance variable names on the inside of partials, like that. But you don't have to do that in this case, especially. You could just omit all of this, which is always good, and it's just going to infer. Well, you got to tell them that too. So instance variables are accessible within all partials in the view too, as well. Yeah, I did not know that. Do people do that? I'm just curious. Do you guys just assume instance variable availability? Yeah, cool, awesome. So we can take it a step further here and do another partial called task row. Okay. So let's say this is actually getting even more unreadable, and we want to break out each one of these table rows into a partial to make it even tighter. So we could do that. And this is where passing those variables becomes useful. Task, index. There's some shortcut to that. And that's going to pass the current task and index along. And there we go. Cool. Does that make sense? So we kind of have this nested doll thing, right? First thing is going to go to task table, and at tasks is still available to us, which is cool. And then once we do the loop, we're actually going to pass off the rendering of each table row to yet another partial. But because we're looping through each one of these things and it's not an instance variable that we've already set, we have to tell the template about these variables or the partial, because in the partial we ask it to get things about it. So we have to tell it what task we're looking for. And you simply do that with this kind of syntax right here. There's an equivalent one. It's this. You might see this. think it's that's I think both of these work. By the way, this is how you do comments in ERB. Change the equal sign to a plus. Either one of those. Questions on partials? Awesome. So, what do we want to explore next? I had some things I put in the Rails School thing. You guys have any requests?
I have a question.
We can do some different templates. Yeah, go ahead.
This is my first time, and I feel like I'm behind.
Uh-huh.
Is there some reading?
Oh, this is a good question. Yeah. Well, I answer that in two ways. I'm glad you asked about the reading, though. I'll answer the question I wanted to mention first. Is this Rails guide thing here? I'll put it in here. Is this is really, really, really good kind of intermediate level reading, I think. It's like once you kind of know what's going on, if you guys want to dig into how to use the partials, you remember I talked about this, but you can't really quite remember exactly. This is going to have a really good, basically go into everything I talked about. But how to get from like I'm not really sure what's going on to having a sense of Rails, that's sort of a good question. There are some. I learned by using Michael Hartle's Rails tutorial, which he just refreshed. Actually, there's a new version out. I highly recommend it. People have found it too heavy and complex.
Daniel
Kehoe, yeah.
And he's got a simpler one that may feel smart.
Yeah.
He's got Michael Hartle's and Daniel Kehoe is
Can you go back, please, that you shared?
Mm-hmm. Go to here. Yeah, would you like me to put this stuff in here? Okay, so here's Hartle. And it's free online, although y'all should buy his book because he's a good guy and it's worth the money. And then is this what we're talking about, Ken?
Yeah.
Cool.
And he'll give you his
What?
I mean, he'll give you a online.
Cool.
School I just went to, we did Sinatra first.
Ah.
We got into Rails, and that was a really good idea. Sinatra is like a much lighter version of Rails, so it's still a framework. But there's a lot less going on behind the scenes.
What was the name?
It's called Sinatra.
Yeah, put it right up there. Yeah.
Can you write the
Yeah, it's right up there. This will stay available to you, I believe, after the class. Thing. If you can't, just email me. Email the Rails School. You can email through the site.
You should be able to just go to the whiteboard like for the class.
Yeah.
Or Rails School job.
Yeah, that's what I want.
I think it would be useful to maybe see how ERB changes the Rails tags into HTML. So we see this, but it really prints out a whole bunch more shit that we could go and inspect the elements and see what a JavaScript tag really spits out into the end user.
That's a great idea. Yeah, great idea. I don't think I have much in here that's very interesting. In the head, I might.
The application layout.
Yeah, you want to check this out?
Because.
See what's going on with this kind of stuff?
So just like, the JavaScript include tag is not standard HTML. That's
yeah, that's a good point.
And it spits out something totally different.
Totally.
And it really just lets us write less and get a full functionality.
Yeah. So these are so establishing link tag. This is bringing in the the CSS, and the JavaScript include tag is bringing in the JavaScript. Both of them have TurboLinks on, which is cool. And I don't know how much about TurboLinks works, but what it lets you do is it lets you not refresh the entire page every time you make a call, which is really cool. So instead of having to send the nav and the head over the wire every time, Rails is kind of doing like a pseudo JavaScript thing, and it'll just send the main body, and that's what TurboLinks is. But let's look at this and see what's actually going on under the hood. And if you guys know more, pipe up, because I would be happy to learn some more. So this is what we're getting from all those things, right? So we got the title, and then we have a link. And this is linking to application.css.
So this is not
Or assets. Yep.
This is not the general code. That's actually the output, right?
Yeah, this is actually the generated stuff that all of our users will see. This right here. And it comes from
They don't see
this.
the loop.
Oh, I'm sorry?
They don't see the loop.
You mean they won't see?
They don't see
They don't see the
Yeah. So this is bringing in the CSS, which we don't really have right now. But if we wanted to add some CSS to the project, we'd do it. Convention is you'd add a custom file, but you could do it here as well. And this makes sure you don't have to do, normally to do an HTML, you have to bring it in with some sort of link statement.
But I just think it's cool to note that, that's a lot more code. That first line of the link data is longer than what we have, what Rails does on that.
See what else we got? We got jQuery, super cool. jQuery for free, great JavaScript library for interacting with objects. Don't have to do anything. We have unobtrusive JavaScript, which is sort of the modern standard way of writing JavaScript. Links, and then any custom JavaScript we get. This is cool. You guys know about the authenticity token? Authenticity token? This is a super cool thing to go into. You probably know a little bit about it, right? Yeah, you want to give it a shot?
Sure. So if you have, there's kind of two things. There's authenticating a user that they're actually a person on a machine, as opposed to maybe something that might be malicious. And then there's authenticating that user is who they actually say that they are. So that part's the username and password. But authenticity, it's I don't know, it's kind of shaky on it still, but basically when you go to a website, you make a request to the server for the content, and they'll send you a quick, are you really a person on a computer, or something like that, and if it checks out, then they'll send you the stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, that's good. This is kind of confusing because this is actually something slightly different than that, and I'm surprised it's showing up here in the head. One thing I'm going to do, so let's do something real quick. So I think, I'll explain this, and then we can kind of dig into this if we want. This is the actual, I think this is the cross-site request forgery token, which is close. But what that is it's basically whenever you ask for a form from a Rails application, it's going to give you a CSRF token that you need to send back with your response to that form. So if it's to make a new task, we can maybe do this, we have to send it back that same thing. And that helps, and I struggle to understand exactly how this works, but that helps prevent a certain type of session hijacking attack where people can grab a cookie off the wire. And I'll be damned if I can tell you exactly what happens. But the point is, it's a security feature to help basically protect your controllers from accepting bad data from across the web. Why it's being set in the head is really beyond me, because usually it's set as part of a form. Any insight of that? So it's weird that it's here, but it's CSRF token is what that is. And we were talking about Angular before, and when you make an Angular app work with a Rails backend, handling the CSRF token is a really important and very kind of challenging thing to do. And a lot of people will just say, screw it, we don't need it. But it's a
Well, we get
idea.
it free from our model.
Yeah.
If you go quickly to the model, you'll see that. Oh no! Oh, because we made it by hand. I guess it just does it automatically.
You know where it's
Generate the model, or right there.
Yep, there it is. Yeah. See what happens if we turn this off. You never do this, right? I mean, it should be obvious, right? Now, I don't want protection from forgery, whatever the hell that means. Yeah, it's still there because I don't know what's going on with that. That's really weird.
But it's for your own protection.
This is a freaking browser plugin. It is for your own protection. So, one thing I thought might be interesting. So we could look at some of the helper methods there are for Rails. There's a bunch of those. There's some interesting stuff about internationalization and how to format time, which might be kind of interesting to look at. Or we could make a form and we could play with CSRF forgery and sessions and stuff. What do you guys think?
What was that first one you said?
So options are we can just dive through the Rails docs and look at the handy view helpers and see what's out there. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, there's that. We could dig into a similar related thing, view helpers related to date formats and how to set default date formats and internationalization, or we could make a form and check out the form helper and how Rails renders forms. We got one vote for the first one. Any other votes?
Yeah, I had a question on the helpers too.
All right, we got 2 for the helpers. We have achieved we got Ken. I don't know. Anyone want to break the momentum for helpers? Okay, helpers it is. Cool. Yeah. So what is a helper? I think when people Rails is funny. I think when people say Rails helpers, they mean Rails view helpers, in particular. And there's 2 ways you can get helpers in Rails. The first is from Rails itself, right? Active record and active support and all these things give you an inordinate number of really handy view helpers that we can kind of look at, and then also you can define your own as well. So these are 2 really cool things. For defining your own, they tend to be just defined here in application helper, right? So let's do a real quick one of these. So let's do reversify this is pretty normal Ruby, right? We're just going to define a method. It's going to take an argument myString, and it's going to do myString to array.reverse. Is that going to work? And then what we can do is we can go to review and we do this. And we call it. And that should be all we need to do to make that handy-dandy method available in reviews. I'm going to restart my server. It's been a little while since I've done this, so this might not work. So let's see. Yeah. How do you do a string to it? How do you reverse a string?
I think it's just reversed.
Can you do it on the string? Thought you had to change it to array first. Is it 2A, not 2array?
It's 2A, yeah.
So where am I? Cool. Now we have a very useful helper, right? That reversifies our stuff. Does that make any questions? Does that make sense? So again, all if you have some sort of data transformation or thing that you keep doing in your views a lot of times, another common way to simplify your view code is to define a helper method, right? This is different than a partial. A helper method is something that takes data as an input generally and outputs some transformation of that data. Can think of I actually don't write that many helper methods because Rails has an astounding number of all the common ones built in. But any examples of cool helper methods you guys have made? Sometimes I'll do helper methods to define. I have done them actually to define. I have one that I commonly use, which is all the states in an array of arrays with the state abbreviations that I kind of just use. Look at a recent project here and see if there's anything cool. Helpers. Cool. So here's a helper. Here's a couple ones. Here's one that it just returns the. It's a title helper, so I can call this at the beginning of my views, and it'll return. There's a base title. If there's no page title, it returns the base title. But if there's a page title, this is actually ripped off of Michael Hartle. This is code right out of his tutorial that I kind of just used. And then I have a couple of helper methods. In the application helper, you get all the kinds of infrastructure you get in general around Rails views and controllers. So I have a current user method available to me in my controllers as a function of using devise for login, which is a common gem, right? So what this does, current user is always going to be a user object. That user has a column called role, right? And then I wrote a little user method to check. And so these are things that I can do in my views, and I can do something like, if super admin user, render partial. This is pseudocode, right? But I would use this to control whether or not someone sees like an edit button or not, right? Whether a user can change another user's permissions or not. So that's another common use case for helper methods is to, look up information about the current user, things like that.
And when you generate a controller, it'll generate a helper for you.
A helper file in that controller method. Yeah.
Does it not all have to live in application helper? It can, with a user's controller, you can put in your users. You can put user helpers in the user helper folder.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Compartmentalize it.
And they're available site-wide. Yeah. Yep. Like I said, I don't use them that much, so I really haven't done that much, but that's totally right. And that's more, I think, the convention is to kind of group things around stuff that makes sense. Cool.
I had a question about some of the tag helpers.
Yeah, sure.
It seems like some of them take just as long to type as typing just HTML. I'm just kind of curious.
Sure. For example.
Like the link.
Oh, the link to tag?
Yeah, I was like reading that.
Uh-huh.
That page you suggested, Ruby on Rails guides.
Yep, totally.
I don't know. It's like, are some of those tag helpers, like, what are the advantages of using some of those tag helpers versus just doing the HTML?
It's a great question. I'll answer that by showing you here's something cool I figured out. The answer, I think your observation is probably right, but people still use the tag helpers for a couple of reasons. I'd say one is just standardization and convention. Two, when you start adding a lot of stuff, to the link helpers, they become a little bit cleaner. But 3, you get a lot of really cool Ruby, really awesomeness when you use the link helpers. The common awesomeness is the path helpers, right? So this is let's see here. This is this app for that nonprofit I mentioned here, right? So I use polymorphic path a lot. So give me a second here. Layouts. Okay, cool. So here's some pretty generic link to helpers, right? We got supporters. So some of the nice things are here. I don't have to worry about what the actual URL is that I'm generating. I'm using the Rails path helpers to do that. Now you could certainly write HTML and use ERB to plug that in there, but then you're writing a lot of quotes and ERB tags you don't need to. So already you're into shorter keystrokes here for sure. But I could see arguing that it's like in this case it's like actually still easier to type it out by hand. You'd be in the minority of people, but I don't think you would be doing anything like horrible. But excuse me, we can do some even cooler stuff though. So for example, polymorphic path. This is like my new favorite awesomest thing in the world. Because what polymorphic path does is it takes as an argument first an active record object, right? And then it takes a hash, and it probably takes a lot of other stuff, but you basically supply the controller action, and this will return the edit path for whatever you give it, which is super freaking cool because now we can use this partial on every single view there is. I'll give you a more concrete example here. The way I designed this, I'm a horrible designer, by the way. I have a lot of index views of records, and on the right of every index view, there's a button, details or edit, right? I don't want to write the details button 30,000 freaking times. The problem is, though, I have supporters and donations and all these things. How do I write one piece of code that will actually generate the link to the details view, the show view of any object I give it? And it's polymorphic path. It's super awesome. And you can see here I'm giving it a class and some other attributes as well. And then here's edit polymorphic path. So all I do is I include one helper in every index view in my entire application and just pass it the record, and it automatically generates the appropriate edit and delete links. So does that make sense? This code is used on probably 30 pages. So that's another reason is you can do some really powerful stuff. And this also is just something I learned today. You can actually check to see if a route exists. This block only renders the edit button if there's an edit route defined for the record, which is super cool. But the gotcha is it throws an exception if it comes back wrong. So you have to catch it. You know what I mean? It doesn't return false, so you can't do if. It'll blow up. So actually, that was one of the polymorphic record path. I think is one of my favorite view helpers. Do you guys know about internet? I'll segue into the internationalization and the L helper method. Rails has just incredible, cool things. So you probably have a common problem in your applications where you have, let's say, timestamps and dates everywhere, but you want to display this in a user-friendly way, right? Well, Ruby has the standard methods like strf time that most programming languages do to format a date time as a nice string. But let's say you want to just write that code once for your application, so that if you move it to another country or just change, you can change that code once, right? You could write yourself a helper method that was like format time, right, and then format it with a string. But Ruby has a built-in thing called L18N, internationalization, which I guess this makes no sense to me, but does this make sense to anyone? Internationalization. The point is that if you do, what you can do is you can go into your config and in your locales .en.yaml, basically in a configuration file, you get to define these formats. And then you can use these really easy helper methods, like shortening to L, to format your time strings all over the place in all your views, which is super cool. So in this one, I have a partial to show the record created at and updated at, and I'm using a format that I defined here to do that. So I think that's a really cool thing about Rails Helper, is this built-in internationalization thing. And you can specify sort of limitless versions of this, and so you'll see people who write, I don't do this, but if you write software that is used around the world, this stuff is really, really important, and it's something you probably want to know about. It's not just timestamps. You can have greetings and various sort of idiomatic region-specific things that are all configurable with the config file and available to you as a helper, which I think is pretty cool. Other cool ones are number to currency. Trying to think. Anyone have any favorite helpers that you use a lot?
Forms.
Forms? Yep. Totally. Want to talk about forms real quick? Or any other questions about helpers? Or we could sort of dig into, we could talk about rendering a little bit, actually. Let's talk about rendering a little bit in the controller. The take-home point is that no matter when you're writing your view files, almost no matter what you want to do with your data to make it presentable, there's probably a built-in Rails helper to do that. Humanize is a very nice method, right? That's super cool. That takes snake case things. There's number to currency. There's just all kinds of different kind of permutations. So before you reinvent the wheel, you should definitely check. So what if? So how do you specify exactly what view you want the controller to render? You can do it like this. Clear. Good. See if that'll work. Cool, great. Cool. So what I just showed, I hope, is that you can actually override Rails default behavior by using the render keyword and then the name of the template that you have there. This isn't useful a ton of times, but it is commonly useful if you in create actions, where if you want to say, or if you have something the user's doing where if it worked you want to send them to someplace, but if it didn't you want to re-render another template, you can use an if-then statement to do that. So commonly used also with the redirect too. Keyword, right? This, I think, is going to be the same. It's because I don't have a tab. Right, of course. Cool. Do you guys know the difference between the two things here? What's going on here and what's going on with the other way?
It's the method that it uses, right? So whether it makes a full call to the server using a GET or one uses like I think the redirect. Wait. Damn, no, I don't remember.
Yeah, it seems like I think you're
What's
wrong.
the method
Yeah.
that it uses to get the information?
Yeah, I think that's close. But so what's happening? So first of all, is when we go to task. Actually, maybe that'll be. To see what's happening there. No, I'll give you guys a hint. I want to do it the other way. I'm on 2 lines of code. Oops. And the URL doesn't change. What's happening here, the other one's easier. What's happening here is that when we go to tasks.listing, I configured a route to tell Ruby to use this controller method, right? Just because listing isn't the standard thing. So it goes into this listing, and it says, and the first thing it finds is redirect to root path. So it actually then sends back to the user a command. It's like, oh, go over here. The browser sends back another request which hits this, which gets it from the database and renders the thing. So actually what's happening with this one is when you go to task listing, it's actually bouncing us all the way back to this. Right, or I'd say usefully. Because by the time you get here, it's already bounced the user back, right? So probably, stuff would continue to execute there, but it would be kind of too late to do anything useful for the user. Does that make sense?
How about render? If you put out render.
That's a good question, actually.
You're saying with redirect, you wouldn't?
Yeah, I don't think so, but I might be wrong. Yeah, I guess that's right. Well, the point I was trying to make, though, is that when it hits that redirect, this method has kind of lost control. It's handing the rendering off to that index method. That was the point I sort of failed to make by making it be cool. But with this one, everything's happening in this method. It's still performing the database call, but it's simply using the same view file. Right? You're getting the equivalent result for the most part, but with this method, what we're doing is it's a different controller action, a different database call, but we're simply overriding the default, which would be to render something called listing, right? .html.arb, and telling it, no, render something called index.html.arb. And so this is how you can have fine-grained control over exactly what things your deals are rendering. Again, really commonly used. Let's say you have a create action, and you might say, if my object was created, redirect to object path, else render new, right? And what that's going to tell the application is, hey, if it worked, send them to go see the object they just created in the database. If it didn't, I want you to render this other view. I want you to render the form again for the user to try again. Make sense? So we talked about templates, and you guys are. This is definitely the record for the amount of content I've gotten through. Anthony, are you?
I was Googling the difference between render and redirect.
Did I get it right? Did I get it right?
Yeah, no. So render will render a particular view using instance variables available in the action.
Yeah.
Redirect will send a redirect to the user's browser telling it to re-request a new URL.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah. And, yeah. And I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, cool. Sometimes you can only use render or redirect one. You can't use both in the same call. I don't think. But render gives you some other. Yeah, you get some weird errors if you try to use both, which I think I'm sort of embarrassed to say I've done because I don't know why in the world you'd ever want to do that. But yeah, that's what. Yeah, doing program logic in your controllers will get you in trouble. But here's some really cool stuff though about render. Whoops, it's not really what I wanted. Let's see. Well, render product show. Yep. So you can do this in different controllers too. You know, you can bounce back and forth by exactly the way it works in the view. You can actually throw this thing in the template. It sounds like it's the same code. Render an arbitrary file. That's cool. So you can render text. Here we go. Here's some cool stuff. So this is awesome right here. You can render JSON, which is really cool because now we can use Rails to serve machine-readable content to things like JavaScript, mobile devices, other stuff like that. You'll see an old pattern where they'll put in the controller, they'll actually do a thing where Rails tries to figure out what you want, and it'll render HTML or JSON based on the call type. And that's sort of an old pattern. I would say if you're using render to render, I would put that in a different controller, right? So if you have code that's rendering JSON, that probably should be factored into a different part of your application and not combined in the overall controllers. But you could, if you wanted, XML, JavaScript in your controller. This is super cool. You can also specify the layout on a per controller basis. So this is cool. Remember how we had that layout option at the top of the controller? It says this controller is using these templates or layouts, and this controller is using those templates and layouts. Well, you can drill down and actually tell each action which template or layout to render. So let's say you had, you wanted to have the same template for every single show action across the application, right? For example, every single record show, you would just do layout, record, show layout, and then a different one for all the record create actions. So that's pretty cool. This one is also cool, render layout false. This is really useful under some circumstances. I have a, and also you can do render nothing true. So you can tell Rails not to use a layout, and you can also tell Rails not to render anything. I had one time when I didn't want to render anything. There's a software as a service application that a lot of people use called Nation Builder. A lot of nonprofits use it. And one of the things they have is they have a webhook thing so they do online donation payments, right? And so someone goes to their website, makes a donation payment, they'll blast off some data to me when that happens, a webhook, right? And my application wants to listen for this thing. In order to do that, I need to write a controller action to kind of receive it. But I don't want the controller action to render anything. I just want it to take in the data, right? So this is a common thing if you're writing, if you're writing API actions or some kind of on stuff. Cool. All right. Any other questions? It's my email. Just broadcast that to the world. Cool. Let's see if there's anything else. We kind of covered a lot of this. We already looked at all this. You can do all kinds of cool things. Conditional layouts. I mean, so this stuff gets pretty remarkably complex. I thought I'd end by just doing a quick tour of the Form 4 helper. That's a common thing. So let's add in cool task. Where's my task controller? So I just quickly made a little controller with a new action that's just going to create a little new task object for me. A lot of you guys have seen this before. This is the, doesn't matter to me. This is the Form 4 helper. Except I did it wrong. I think it's mad at me. Do you guys know why it's mad at me? Maybe it's just my ID. I use simple form, so I have to plead ignorance. Jeez, I'm getting tired. Thanks. Cool. So this thing gave us all kinds of really cool stuff in our form. You can see we have a form. It specifies the action. It gives it a default class and a default ID. And this is super handy if you're writing CSS, because why specify a class if you know what's coming for free anyway? That's pretty nice. A method post. And then we have this weird div that's been put in here for us with the display of none. And then we have this weird UTF-8 checkmark thing. But then we have our old friend, the CSRF meta token again, coming in actually as an input, right? So when we submit this form and send it back to the server, this is actually going to be packaged up with that whole payload of the name and the description that we're sending along. And Rails is going to look for that and want to see it, and if it doesn't, it's going to throw a big error. So this is really cool, and this is stuff that we get for free with like no code. Right? All that cool stuff. The thing also about forms that I encourage you guys to check out is Simple Form. Anthony, use Simple Form? Form 4, yeah. I switched to Simple Form like a year ago, and it's just like made my life radically better. Simple Form is a gem that it's I used to things like why improve on this Form 4, but it really makes generating forms so much more elegant, and you get this ability to do one-liners. It's pretty sweet. Like default placeholder text. I mean, so this allows you, it cleans up your syntax. It allows you to, to have more elegant forms for users with less junk. and it pretty much all you do is you do simple form for, and then you just do this f.input thing. So that's a really good thing to check out. I'm a big fan of it. Yeah, it's super cool. It can be, it's a little bit heavy. It kind of adds a lot of HTML markup cruft to your thing, and getting it styled can be a pain. I use Bootstrap most of the time, and like getting the Bootstrap form for business was kind of a pain in the ass. So, or simple form rather. Cool, RSS views. Any questions or anything? Thoughts, concerns, feedback? I didn't do quite as much prep for this class as I've done for previous classes. So you guys are probably the most advanced. And also, I don't think I've ever had a class with everyone at this similar level before, ever, which is really, really interesting. Most of the time, it's diverse. So, all right, go write beautiful view code.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Is there any other root classes?
Oh yeah, there will be. So there's another class next week that Gabe is teaching. Same time, same place, and it's about Rails and GIS. So I am actually going to try to come to this. It sounds kind of cool. Gabe's probably doing something for work that's super cool. So it's pretty ad hoc now. What's that? No, Gregory does. One of the Russians. Gregory's been